And as promised, we have joining us Douglas Spencer. And I'll never call you Douglas, but Doug Spencer. And he's just written a book, Do They Care? And it's the one question all brands should ask themselves continually that I screwed up at the beginning of the show when I mentioned it. But John's going to cut that out. And so Doug is joining us. And in the spirit of full transparency, Doug and I went to college together.
Did you guys graduate same year?
No, I'm younger.
But we were both members of the Lambda Chi Alpha fraternity, and Doug, I remember Doug going through Rush. It was this time of year, many moons ago,
right,
probably.
Yeah.
And we've remained friends ever since. And prior to you working for yourself and you're the founder and president of Spencer Brenneman.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you were working at Thomson Reuters. And so before we get into the book and stuff, you want to tell us a little bit about what you did at Thomson Reuters?
Sure. Well, it's nice to be back. Thank you. I was here actually about 10 years ago, I think, talking about the Thomson Reuters.
Gosh, was it that long ago?
Yeah, I know. It seems...
It was on the old platform.
Yeah. It was when it was radio, and I didn't have to worry what my hair looked like.
Well, don't worry about it now.
Yeah. So Thomson Reuters, I was head of brand management and helped roll out the brand when the Thomson Corporation purchased Reuters, and we created a new brand, and rolled it out across the country, around the world, and had a good old time.
Is that like is Thomson Reuters? I should probably know this, but is it similar to a Time Inc. group or something like Condé Nast? Is it a news platform? News
is now.
Now
I haven't been with them for almost 5 years, so I really am not qualified to talk about their business
but I just wondered what they did while you were there.
The news, Reuters News, is something everyone's familiar with, but that's a smaller part of their business. They have, but they've actually just spun the financial business off, I understand. But they had information about financial services, so anybody that manages your money uses information from them.
Reuters,
but they also have legal, so your lawyers all use all those books on the shows that you see. Those are all by Thomson Reuters.
Oh, okay.
And,
what was the of the two brands? I associate Reuters as being the more recognizable.
Yeah, it's true.
And was that an issue when you were working on?
A little bit.
Because Thomson acquired Reuters, and so the acquiring
right.
brand usually is the one that wants prominence, and yet Reuters, because of their heritage as a news service and as an information service, they command the headspace of most people. Most people would not know Thomson.
Right.
So does that lead us into your book, I'm thinking?
Anything can lead us into the book.
That's the old joke, John. Remember when they said Delta Airlines and Eastern Airlines merged and they both took each other's names? Became Delta Airlines.
Yeah, because they saved the airline.
Saved airlines out of Eastern and Delta.
Yeah. That's exactly. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of. I mean, brands are not people. Brands often exist sometimes beyond the companies.
Yeah.
They live in our minds. They represent certain things to us. We grew up with certain brands that aren't even around anymore, but they're memorable.
Right.
So. The question the question is, do they care?
Right.
And that's the one brands need to be asking themselves continually. And so who is the reader of this book primarily?
Sure. The reader for this book, I wrote this for, so my business helps small and mid-sized companies with their identity crises when they can't figure out really who they are and how they should talk about themselves. And so this book was written for people that are either running a business or starting a business, or maybe they're maybe they're having issues with employee engagement, or so head of HR or head of marketing. But it's really for people that have responsibility for the company and how it interacts with the people that are most important to their success, and that's they. That's the they. So that's employees. We start off talking about the employees because you can't have happy customers if you don't have happy employees.
You know, I've always said that, and nobody ever really wants to believe that.
Well, I listened and I wrote it in a book.
No, but don't you think if your employees are happy, they're going to treat the customer well,
Absolutely.
and they're going to treat people well, and in any business, that's going to be the case.
And there's data to back that up. There's data left and right that the client retention rate is 2.5 times higher when you have an engaged workforce. I mean, there's just stat after stat. And then there's the whole idea of attracting and retaining the best talent. And so that's a huge, huge challenge, especially when the economy is the way it is now, that you want to make certain that your employees actually care about what you do, and it's not just a place to get money. And it's not just a place to get health care. And then, of course, there's the clients.
But that last point you just said, not a place to get health care, not a place to make your paycheck. More and more I hear from individuals that jobs are no longer cradle to grave, as in like a Japan scenario, or in the old days of IBM, you know, Big Blue, you were on and you were, boom, all the way through. Now people look at jobs as a 2 or 3 year stepping stone to something else. So, you know, that's a lot of human capital walking out the door on a revolving basis that actually does represent the brand, right?
Right.
So is the idea here that even if people are only on board for 3, 4, 5 years, they need to espouse the brand, live the brand, and be the brand? Is that what you're getting at?
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm a firm believer that everyone in a business needs to understand the brand strategy, not just the people that are customer facing, and certainly not just marketing, but everybody needs to understand the brand, because if they're there, if they're employed, there's a reason they're there that will eventually get to the customer. So whether they're there for a few years or many years, then it's important for them to understand. And I think that companies that really create brands that people as employees can connect with, they don't have the out the door in 3 years. There's a lot of companies out there that people never leave because they're really very happy.
And they enjoy what they do.
And they enjoy what they do, yeah. Yeah.
Is there confusion? I know when I've worked within the corporate structure, there was always confusion about what a brand was. And I'll use the example because it was a real-life example of Subaru when I worked at the Subaru car company. And there was always the question of, is Subaru the brand or is Outback the brand? In other words, can a model, so if you're Procter & Gamble, would you spend money on the Procter & Gamble brand, or would you spend money on Crest toothpaste?
Right.
Or if you're Mondelez that does Oreos, do you spend money on Mondelez or do you spend money on Oreo? And so, but is Oreo a brand? Is Outback a brand? Is Crest a brand, or are they products? And that was always the give and take, and there was never really a consensus sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 different brand strategies. You can have a house of brands, or you can have a branded house, and it depends on...
Oh, say that again?
You can have a house of brands, which is like...
P&G?
P&G, like Hasbro.
Okay. Would Disney qualify as a house of brands? Because under Disney we have Marvel, we have Star Wars, we have a lot of different things, but that's a tough one.
It is a tough one.
Okay, anyway,
continue. But I think most car companies are branded houses, because the idea is you want to get somebody in Outback, but you might want to move them on to another model at some point. And if they have an emotional connection with the Outback and not Subaru, then that's going to be a lot harder. But if they have the emotional connection with Subaru in general, it's going to be a lot easier to move them to another model. Bigger
product, smaller product, more fuel efficient.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like our partner here is Volkswagen, and I was on a bike ride upstate the other day, and I went by a house that had a Beetle, a Jetta, and a Tiguan. The Beetle, they were all. It was either people. I thought that's a branded household.
Right.
They're into the brand. To them, I don't know how it matters if it's articulated to a model, but it was VW.
It was.
And so I can see what you mean about if you come on board with like an Outback as the example, you may graduate to a different one, but now you're into the Subaru brand. Right. Interesting.
Right. Yeah.
We're speaking with Doug Spencer in his latest book, Do They Care? And there was a whole chapter you had on mergers and acquisitions, and I thought that might have been, for a book this size, because it is John calls these consumable books. Yeah. You can read this between
New York and Chicago.
Why the chapter on mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, well, so that is where brands all come together. The times of mergers and acquisitions are, if you've never been through one, then God love you, because they're painful, or can be. Brands are emotional by design, and when you start taking away a brand from somebody, whether that's the brand they work for or whether it's the brand they use as a consumer, then people get upset, and there's a lot of emotional connection, a lot of emotional disconnect there. And so it's a huge opportunity to think about brand and think about where people's heads are at during times of mergers and acquisitions. So what you want to do, and we talk about this in the book, that you want to focus on making certain that in times of uncertainty, that the people who do care about your brand continue to care about it, And also, if you're taking a brand away from them, you have to give them something to go to, because you can't just leave a vacuum. Humans do not like vacuums. We have to fill it. And so if you're saying, okay, we're ending Acme, and we are bringing you to
Stop and Shop.
Stop and Shop, yeah. Then you have to give them reasons why the new brand is really worth them saying goodbye to the old brand.
And it's an emotional thing. So the new brand is going to satisfy you emotionally like the old one did, and it's going to do it better.
Right.
I suppose it has to be a better proposition, right?
Right.
So I was watching TV the other day, and I saw a commercial for Uber. And, Uber's been in the headlines quite often because of issues with drivers, the whole bit. But it's all about the theme of the spot was the door opening, and the camera would show someone opening a car door and getting out to the hospital to deliver a baby, a wedding, a restaurant, a dad comes home. And there was one quick scene where there were two guys in the back of the car talking and smiling, and then they held hands.
Yeah.
And then the camera quickly goes away. It was an interesting brand spot to me because Uber's had some trouble with their LGBT representation. And you talk about how brands can incorporate references and/or representation smartly in the book, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that we help our customers with is coming up with brand promises. So really articulating why they even bother to do what they do, what's important to them. And our brand promise at my company is to help, and this was referenced earlier on, to help people and businesses alike enjoy the benefits of living your true life, of being your true self. So helping companies figure that out. And so when I help companies figure that out, it's a way for them to also help their employees figure it out.
So are you saying that's a more internal thing?
Yeah.
So the example I gave of showing a gay couple in an Uber car, that's a consumer-facing message. You're talking about the internal message of employee resource groups, diversity issues, and how the brand treats their employees. Okay.
But on the other hand, it is also important that if you have, if you have a broad client base, you have to make certain that they care about you for reasons that are important to them.
Got it.
Not just reasons that are important to you. And that's the whole point of the book, because I've worked with so many business owners and principals that they're so passionate about what they do. They love what they do. They forget that not everybody cares.
Or lives it every day.
Lives it every day and knows everything they do, knows how cool it's going to be, and knows what's going to happen in 6 months when the new product releases or something like that. So this is why and that's why I named it Do They Care? It's because you really have to think about people outside your sphere, and do they care about what you do? Well, if they don't, then that's a problem.
Have you seen the Uber ad?
I have, yeah.
Well, I'm curious as to what either of you thought of it initially.
I was surprised.
In what way? In a good way, bad way?
In a good way. In a good way. I thought it was well produced. I also was kind of in the back of my head calling bunk on it, because we also know that many of these drivers don't necessarily make a sustainable living. Some do. And at the end, they show the guy putting a ball cap on and going to his kid's softball or baseball game. I'm like, I wonder how often that happens. But you do get an Uber driver now and then, and you'll talk to them, and they've had great experiences. They make some good money. Depends on their locales. What did you think of it?
What did you think?
You're in the hot seat now. Your frat brother's got you in the...
You two have such a connection that you just go right to it. I thought it was very good. I do agree with everything that John said. I think one of the challenges is that they have to find an emotional connection with their users that's different than Lyft's. And that's a real challenge, because the companies aren't all that different.
It's like electricity, right? You want to turn the switch on, you want it to work. So you want the car to show up and take you from A to B. Yeah.
So they've got to work very hard at trying to create a lifestyle brand that people can connect with more so than they connect with the Lyft brand. So, the Lyft has the kind of the funkier, brighter, maybe even younger visual identity. So maybe Uber's trying to create a brand that's more adult or more sophisticated or more part of real life. I mean, I really hate to talk about people's brands because I don't know the strategy behind them. So unless you know what they're trying to accomplish with your brand strategy, it's really not fair to criticize a brand for.
Yeah, you can.
I'm actually going to say, sure, the consumer does. When they pass up the product, they're giving a critique.
Well, that's fine. But I'm saying as a brand strategist, I don't want.
And as someone a brand's going to hire.
Well, here's hoping.
We'll do that.
Well, what do you think of the?
Well, it's interesting you bring up Lyft because recently I always use Uber, and I think it's just habit. Mm-hmm. And
you are a creature of habit.
But so many of the drivers now are also Lyft drivers, so they've got both decals on the cars. And I thought the ad, I was surprised. At first, I thought it was just a car company ad, and I thought it was a bit forced. And I thought it was a bit forced, but I understood what they were trying to do. But hey, it's a good effort. It's a new industry, right?
Well, back when you were in Subaru, I'm curious, when you started creating, am I allowed to ask questions?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
No.
When you were at Subaru and you first started doing the LGBT focused advertising, did you worry about, how did you find that balance to between making it feel authentic and making it feel like a consumer play?
Well, and this goes back to your point of knowing what happens internally sometimes with the strategy. The LGBT part of Subaru's overall marketing strategy was really about all-wheel drive cars. And the brand made the decision to sell all-wheel drive cars solely. First brand to go 100% all-wheel drive. And in identifying consumer groups, one of them happened to be LGBT, or at that time really just lesbians.
Yeah.
John's agency actually did the research, unbeknownst to me, kind of in an odd way. That's a different story. But John and his business partner, I was in Chicago, John and his business partner were doing some quiet research for Subaru and identified one consumer group being women head of households, which turned out to be lesbians. But the other consumer groups were educators, healthcare professionals, something they called rugged individualists.
Which encompass skier, kayaker, that whole.
And so is man versus nature sort of sports. And so the whole marketing program included all of those categories. And what was great about it was you could be a kayaker and you could be young, old, male, female, black, white, whatever. There was the mindset of a kayaker. And it was a more cost-efficient way to be in a very crowded space of auto. But there was an issue because we called it the fifth niche with the lesbians. There was an issue about pushback and the religious right. And we had, they hired PR firms and they hired all kinds of different, what do they call it, crisis management companies to help. But at the end of the day, and we always have said this, if you were offended by the advertising, people that were offended by the advertising were really not the customer anyway.
Target.
Yeah, they weren't the target.
Yeah.
But there was certainly, it wasn't one of these I'm going to bang on the table and I can't believe you're doing this, the smart thing. And it was really the importance of having a straight ally internally said, these people are already buying the cars.
Right.
So let's talk to them in the first person.
Right.
And that's really where it came about. But John and I still get calls to this day. We just did something last year for NPR and
Planet Money.
Planet Money.
They discovered, Tim had done an article. He was interviewed for an article in Priceonomics.
I was 22 years old. The campaign's older.
And, and they discovered, and Tim gave a great interview, which led to this Planet Money episode, which did a really nice encapsulation of the project. But to a point that in Tim's example and the question you asked him, and to your book, one of the key points of the LGBT program was brand fidelity. And so we were given, as the agency, a very succinct script of what the campaign meant to the larger brand, and it was always what Tim said. It's all about smart. It's about the rugged individualist, the independent driver, whatever, who seeks this kind of control from a vehicle. They happen to be gay. So that was literally at the bottom of the thing. But so we were reinforcing brand at top, and then as the cascading message went, you were then reinforcing why that kind of consumer makes sense to this particular brand. That branding message was highly disciplined, and that came out of Tim as a director of marketing, and his associates at the time were also on board with that messaging. So that held for a good long time. I mean, if you read quotes that I've given in different articles from years ago, you will almost see the exact same thing given to the different reporters, because it wasn't that I was parroting it. I believed it, and I knew that was a strategy. But that goes to the core of people in the brand, knowing the brand and speaking about the brand,
right, and feeling it,
and feeling it,
and it can't just be hollow, because A, they're not going to stay around, and B, the world is so cynical now. We can sniff out insincerity.
Well, and that's
quite quickly.
Yeah, and that's what happens with, I think, brands. If you get a new CMO that comes in that he or she wants to make a splash or make an impression, and there's the famous auto again, BMW. Everybody knew that as the ultimate driving machine. And someone decided we're going to change the tagline, and it flopped. And no, you can't even. Can anybody tell me what it is? Nope. But if I said, you know, what was the Federal Express or FedEx tagline years ago?
Oh,
But it absolutely positively has to be there.
Yeah.
I worked with a moron that decided that should be changed, and I remember saying, "I'm like, you got to be kidding me! You're going to change it? Oh yeah. Well, I don't think they ever had a tagline
You know what?
again.
That would be like Northwestern Mutual changing their tagline from the quiet company to shh. Right? Like, it makes sense, but at the same time, you would not want to screw around with that, right?
But do you find that when you're working with companies that people want to? Oh, we need to revamp. We need to change. We need to get modern. We need
Change for change's sake is never a good idea. I've worked with companies that confuse changing your mind for innovation, and that's not the same thing.
Your mind is, oh, I have an innovation. I changed my mind.
It's not the same thing. So that's why, and there's a lot of research that's involved in what we do. So we do both quantitative and qualitative research, and a lot of the best intel comes from just having conversations with
Qualitative,
just having conversations with your customers, with your employees, with people in the industry that might be able to provide a point of view that's not represented by those other two groups. So just having conversations really helps people. It really helps me when I put together a brand. Decide what's important and what's not. And if there's nothing, if the data doesn't back up that a change is needed, then why do it? Yeah.
Is there a brand you'd love to work with that you haven't worked with?
Well, you know, so I focus on big name brands.
Just a brand in general. It could be small. It could be, you know, someone that you like that you
one that needs help.
Well, I would
focus group.
I would hate to call out anybody. You know, I would hate to call anybody out. But no, I like to work with brands that smaller and mid-sized companies that really just need help figuring out what they are and who they are and what they want to do.
They want to become too, right?
Yeah. And I don't actually. And the way we're structured, we're not built to handle big accounts like, you know, Fortune 500. And
you know what?
And I don't want to.
No, and that's a selling point too. In my opinion, that's something that people will buy. That you, as a consultant, when you are honest and say, we're scaled to do this, we're going to tackle your problem.
Right.
We had when I owned my last agency, Moon City, our joke was, we're so far away from your problem that it's this big. Because on the moon, you know, your problem, your problem's solvable in a second. We can barely see your problem. It didn't fly too well, but yeah.
I guess another way of asking John's question, is there a brand you admire?
Oh, sure. There's plenty of brands I admire. I think Nissan has done a really wonderful job of focusing on their brand message about innovation and excitement.
That shocks me that you bring that up.
Yeah, I didn't say that I particularly care for the cars, but
no, I mean, I
like the way that they've approached branding over the years, and there's some data that shows that it's actually had some really good impact.
Really? Wow.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. You know, certainly everybody says Apple. When I teach a lot, and whenever I teach, I talk about, okay, so pick a brand you like, and I say you can't pick Starbucks, you can't pick Apple, you can't pick Nike, because those are just the obvious ones. But they're obvious for a reason, because they're really good at what they do.
Have they all stubbed their toes in the last year?
Yeah, they have.
I think Apple seems to, I don't know. What do you think, John? Is that $1,000 phone? Do you have it?
Okay, so depending on who you are and how close you are to the brand, they released new MacBook Pros this year. A video blogger or a vlogger ran tests on the new chips and discovered that there was these huge heat problems with the laptop, and it was not giving the consumer the true rated speed of the faster chip. Apple got wind of it. They took his video, they took his tests, and within 2 days they released a software patch to fix the problem. That is stubbing your toe, though. If you're spending $3,000 on a laptop, you don't need to hear that you're not getting the top speed, or I mean, there's that. I know that consumers are sometimes smart enough to disassociate a hardware issue or a fixable problem with brand itself, but others are like, hey, this is it, I'm throwing in the towel. You know, this is the last phone I'm buying when the screen cracks or whatever. You know, take your pick.
Yeah, I know. I might challenge that a little bit, because I think that stubbing your toe is more like back when they had the issues with the first one of the first generations of iPhones, the antenna.
Oh, the antenna gate.
Yeah, and they kept saying, no, it's
how you're holding the phone.
It's not the phone. It's not the phone. It's not the phone.
It's how you're holding the phone.
Exactly. Now that is a toe stubbing. But when you screw up and say, listen, all right, this is not right, but we'll fix it. To me, that's a way to get closer with your customers, to be really to demonstrate that you care and that you're not just there for their money.
Well, there you go. All right.
So why is the book only 100 pages?
Well, because nobody reads. Nobody reads the big books. I mean, come on. Do you really finish cover to cover the major business books?
The last business book I read cover to cover was in preparation. I'm not quite done with yours. It was a rework. Was a book that it was a collection of essays by the author, and it was targeted. It was boom, 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 and he made his point quickly, and you do too. And that's what I think is key. You can make a point in 1,000 pages. You can make a point in 100.
Right.
I'd rather take the 100.
If you have 1 or 2 good examples, you don't need 10.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, folks, the book we've been discussing is Do They Care? It's by the gentleman sitting next to me, Douglas Spencer. And if you're listening on audio, he's sitting to my right. You can't see. He's sitting right to my right. Available on Amazon.com. And Doug is the president of Spencer Brenneman, LLC. How do people reach you?
To find the book, they can do dotheykare.info. That's the fastest way. And then spencerbrenneman.com.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. Thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you in studio again. It's been great catching up. Congrats on the book. Good luck with this.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a really quick break.